with my dyslexia, I think the way that it affected my mental health was mainly through low self-esteem. I'm one of 3 siblings, and my siblings were both conventionally good at school, and at a time when I wasn't. And so I interpreted that as me sort of being lesser than my siblings, and that had an impact on my self-esteem. And I think when you have a thought like that when you're younger, it's difficult to shake as you get older. You build those neural pathways and you kind of take them with you.
Dyslexia has definitely impacted on my mental health, and it was one of the things that led to me getting my diagnosis. So I actually thought I had postnatal depression after my 3rd child and did have some counselling. And when we actually unpicked it, we realised that it was my undiagnosed dyslexia, and I was actually at burnout because what had happened with every child that had come along, I'd had less and less time to use my compensatory strategies. So that was another reason really for getting my diagnosis, because I really needed to help understand my brain a bit more, I think, so that I could manage that burnout a bit more.
From a dyslexia perspective and talking about mental health, it's often around frustration, and something which seems simple to people without dyslexia isn't for someone with dyslexia. So you almost feel like you're being judged and you're not as good as the next person as a result.
You know, if I'm honest, I don't know how closely I'd ever thought about the connection between mental health and dyslexia. I think that it has definitely impacted on my mental health around imposter syndrome and around feeling like I shouldn't be there. In fact, you know, it still takes a lot for me now to believe that I should be doing what I'm doing. Like the people I work with are just so ridiculously smart and clever, and I naturally just feel like I shouldn't probably be there. You know, if you spent your whole early part of your life being told you're slow, thick, and you're not going to do anything, to then be put in, you know, a room with some of the smartest people that you've ever worked with and hardworking people you've ever worked with, it's pretty intimidating. And I have to lean into the knowledge that I've got strengths in other areas. You know, that I'm not going to have the same memory recall. Yes, I am going to make silly grammar mistakes and spelling mistakes, but maybe I'll see things in a slightly different way to them.
So I think one of the things we say is not how has my dyslexia impacted my mental health, but how has being dyslexic impacted my mental health? And what I mean is that if you're dyslexic, you don't do well at school. Very few dyslexics have a good experience at school. Some do, but very few of them have a good experience. Most of us have a terrible experience. And so you spend your formative, most vulnerable years scared and confused and humiliated and thinking of yourself as a failure. That's hard. That's really hard. It takes a lot of muscle to drag yourself out of that.
So I think dyslexia can clearly impact mental health because of the fact that it marks you out as different. And as an individual, it depends how you look at that. You can see that as a negative thing. I'm not like other people, therefore I am worse than them. Or you can look at that as a positive thing. I am different from other people, and therefore I've got the ability to do better things. I've been on both sides of that. So I found actually university in particular quite difficult because of the lack of structure that came with the course content, and also the written written work that went with it, but also the reading that you needed to do at university. That was for my undergraduate. When I was when I did my MBA, which is a far more collaborative course and far more interactive, I excelled in that when it was around speaking with people.
So it has had a big impact on my mental health at different times. I think now I'm aware of that, I try really hard to keep on top of it. I don't always win. I think, you know, you are naturally quite anxious sometimes if you're dyslexic, because you know, it depends on the environment you're in and who you're surrounded by. But I think the nature of dyslexia and the worry and how we mask and compensate, it's something I definitely have to keep an eye on.
When I think about the students who have gone through the assessment process, and even if they haven't taken on a label. I think going through that process and learning that there's a reason why they're finding something difficult is incredibly empowering for the individual. And I have found students who have, almost visibly, like you can see in their body language, they're like, oh, this is why. And there are other people like me whose brains work like mine. And I think that's a really important piece for students to have.
I think before I was told I had dyslexia, I wasn't as confident. I didn't believe in myself that much, even though teachers would tell me you're doing amazing in this. But I think after I was diagnosed with dyslexia, I felt a lot more confident. I had more faith in myself with meeting deadlines and doing the work and getting good grades. Even though I do struggle a little bit in some classes, I still feel like I can do it, and I'm not going to give up even if I do bad in it. I would keep going and aim for a really good grade.
If I didn't understand something repeatedly, I'd be like, why don't I get it? So I would say I get annoyed with myself more than anything.
When I started to get anxiety in year 5 and 6, I think it kind of sparked from just me feeling like I'm not getting the same grades as others. And I think mental health has been a big part of my life, especially getting bullied. I think it really knocked me down. And I went through a really bad space for a while, which wasn't nice, was it? And I think I've come a long way, but it was really hard. We went through some times where I was just not wanting to do anything, and I refused to go to school. It was really hard.
It was clear to us that Jack just got frustrated at certain things he just didn't understand. And that frustration came out quite frequently. And we noticed that at one stage he was losing some of his self-confidence. Despite everybody, his teachers and his old school supporting him, he just did not like the fact that he was falling further and further behind compared to some of his school friends.
I mean, there was times where she wouldn't go to, I'd be waiting by the door and I'd have 2 other children waiting to go to do the school run. And I go to the top of the stairs and Lily's standing there in floods of tears. I don't want to go to school. And there was times where she wouldn't sleep at night on a Sunday. I'm like, why? Because she's going to school on the Monday and she couldn't face it. There's certain days where at school they would do lots of maths and English, and the night before she would be that way. She's not like that now. She's not at all. And that is such a relief, because that was all about her mental health, and that really, really bothered me. The worry was there, but not anymore at all.
We really struggled as a family when she was not in a good place. We felt like failures. We struggled to know what to do and how we were going to fix it. And what we've realised now is you don't fix her. We don't need to fix her. She's perfect just the way she is. But it's just we need to equip her and we need to understand her. And it's not understanding children like this that makes things more difficult for them and for us.
Children with special educational needs are far more likely to self-harm, are far more likely to have suicidal thoughts, far more likely to end up with mental health issues. And I wholeheartedly believe that's a result of the trauma that they've been put through in the education system. So when they haven't had their needs identified, when they haven't had that diagnosis, when they have been misunderstood as the naughty kids in the classroom because they're not sitting still, or they're looking out the window, or they daydream a little bit, because when a child has not been understood, they start to wonder what is wrong with them. Why can't they do things the same way as the child next to them in the classroom? And that inevitably has a really big impact on their mental health and how they feel about themselves. We also know that 50% of offenders in UK prisons have literacy and numeracy difficulties. and those haven't been identified. I attend an all-party parliamentary group for social justice, and often we listen to individuals who either work in the pupil referral units and the alternative provision settings, or parents whose child is in an alternative provision. And time and time again, we hear stories about children who have special educational needs that haven't been identified. And that school to prison pipeline is real. So if you take a child who is in primary school and who hasn't got an identified diagnosis of any sort of SEN, they look out the classroom window, they're daydreaming, they're not paying attention, they get bored, they get fed up, they maybe start distracting the kid next to them. The teacher will quite rightly speak to that child and say, you need to do your work, you're not concentrating. That child might get sent out of the classroom, gets a head teacher's detention, gets excluded, gets expelled. You can see where this goes and how quickly it can gather momentum, where you have a child that has had undiagnosed SEN, needs haven't been met, and they just end up down the wrong pathway, and that has to stop.
There's an awful lot of research to show that those with dyslexia are far more likely to suffer mental health problems, which leads to self-harm and suicidal ideation. My self-harm has come in things like sleeping in toilet cubicles, shop doorways, that kind of thing, because that's what I deserve. It's come in things like substance abuse, you could say. It's also come in sabotaging my own relationships. So, you know, the number of relationships I've sabotaged because I don't feel that I can live up to them, or I don't feel worthy. It comes in all of these ways. It's also that, maybe this is the executive function. A lot of dyslexics, we find regulating emotions hard. And so when things go wrong, you feel it. My God, you feel it. And I certainly do. And you can feel it physically. And so, yeah, and the disaster fantasies you have of things that could go wrong, or you know, the hypothetical situations that there could be, you feel it and it hurts and you go into dark, dark places.